So thank you everybody for dialing in. My name is Kim Darrington and I work for the IUA, and we're here today to enjoy a presentation from our friends and colleagues at Credera, Nick Vaughan and Andy Dixon. And what they will be talking about is a survey which we conducted, or we commissioned, and they conducted, to be fair. We did very little work ourselves. With regards to technology trends and innovation, and for any of you with really long memories, you might recollect that there was a similar survey which the RUA carried out. Well, you'd have to, I think, cast your minds back pre-pandemic. So it was quite some time ago, and obviously a lot has changed since then. The blueprint, obviously, but considerably more changes in technology, digital agendas of our members, and companies trying to innovate in the insurance space. So you will find that there are some links to the blueprint here, but what we're talking about is something much broader than that. And it's actually digital companies and what they need to do, or what analog companies need to do in order to become digital, how one might digitize, which is a subject that Credera know quite a lot about. So I've got a little housekeeping to do, and then I will introduce you to Nick and Andy, and they can take you through the interesting part of this presentation. So firstly, there will be questions at the end of the survey, or end of the presentation, excuse me, which is expected to last approximately 30 minutes. So depending on how long we take answering questions, we should be done well within the hour. In order to ask questions, if you could post them into the Q&A, you can raise them at whatever point during the presentation, and they'll be addressed at the end. There is a chat facility, and if Q&A doesn't work, then feel free to use that. But otherwise, please use the Q&A because it helps us monitor and make sure that we collate all the questions correctly. And a note from our event organizer, who has asked me to remind everybody that the slides, the contact details of the speakers, and the recording of this session, as it is being recorded, will be circulated post-event. There will also be a link to the IUA website, and that will include details of how to register for CPD points if that's something that you're thinking you need to do. So on that note, with no further ado, I will introduce you to Nick Vaughan and Andy Dixon of Credera.
Kim, and thank you everybody for joining us today. My name is Nick Vaughan. I'm a Managing Director at Credera, and I've been with Credera for about 11 years as part of a 25-year career delivering transformation and change to a variety of different organisations. I'm Credera's London insurance market specialist. I've spent about 9 years working in the market, providing assurance on behalf of participants for the central services transformation programmes and the joint ventures for about 8 years. Also working on Blueprint on Future at Lloyd's and Blueprint 2 and the joint solution plan for Blueprint 2, which then evolved into the digital processing services, and also working with a number of market participants to drive their transformation programs. Andy.
Thanks, Nick. And yeah, so I'm Andy Dixon. So I run our insurance sector as a whole. So I've been working in insurance for probably longer than I care to remember. I started off around life and pensions before moving on to the general insurance side, worked in personal lines, commercial lines, and speciality risk. And most of my roles have been in kind of large-scale transformation and CIO roles as well, which is my background. So if we kind of move on to the next slide, please. So I think, as Kim said at the outset, the purpose of this session is to kind of introduce you to the key findings from the IUA survey that we completed, published towards the end of last year. And what we're going to try and do is broaden that discussion or broaden that debate to look at what the implications are for market participants. Before we get into that, I've just gone to the next slide, please. Probably worth just saying, I won't spend too long on this, but just in terms of who we are as Credera, some of you have probably heard of us. Some of you won't have heard of us, although may have heard of us when we were previously called the DMW Group, which I think when we did a lot of the Lloyd's Blueprint work, we were DMW at that time. And what we are is we are specialists in technology and business transformation. We have deep expertise in architecture, whether that's business or technology, and program delivery, with specific specialisms around data and AI, around cloud, around engineering, and certain platforms. We're about 4,000 people globally, about 600 here in the UK. So we're kind of boutique sort of style. And as you'll see kind of in the middle, we work with lots of recognised brands, both in the insurance industry and more broadly. That's probably quite a few of the insurance clients we could add into that mix. So we're going to kick off. Nikki's going to start by giving a bit of a playback with some of the themes from the survey.
Thanks, Andy. Go to the next slide, please. So as Kim said, in 2021, we conducted the first tech trends survey with the IUA. The world then was coming out of the back end of COVID, and the findings were very heavily shaped by those events. The market now faces new challenges with the global events that are obviously transpiring, but also with the inflationary pressures of the last few years. In addition, there are a number of new opportunities. Obviously, there's the forthcoming deliveries from Blueprint 2, with phase 1 coming this year and phase 2 coming sometime in 2025. We've got the shift of focus around cloud. Organizations that have kind of embraced cloud from getting on their infrastructure are now looking to unlock the value of cloud and also looking at cloud native platforms. We've got the drive to data enablement and also digital and machine learning. And I think it's in that context that we wanted to conduct another survey and work with participants to understand how they were facing those challenges, but also embracing those opportunities and moving forward. So we kicked off the survey last year. We set up a questionnaire, got back the findings, got some initial results from those, and then conducted a series of interviews with participants to explore in more depth their feelings around those ideas, try and seek to understand what was behind some of the answers within the survey. And then we issued the report at the back end of last year, and we'll run through a few of the findings this morning. Next slide, please. So what did we find? Well, the three strongest themes that emerged were around operational efficiency, which is as important as ever, particularly in the context of the macroeconomic environment and the uncertainty in the global outlook. Around Blueprint 2 is important to people that, with the first releases becoming imminent, organizations are forming their plans for digital adoption, and also advanced data and analytics remains high and firmly on the agenda, much as it did in 2021. There was no great surprise in any of those findings, but there was real nuance in each of the areas, and in particular in the interplay between them. So let's take each of them in turn, and I'll talk through some of the facets of those and also look at the interplay. So firstly, around operational efficiency, of all of the possible challenges with it that kind of within the market, this one came up most frequently in the top 3 for the respondents. It also came up in 2021, and it's unsurprising that it remains right at the top of the agenda. But why isn't more progress being made? And in the survey, what we saw, there were a number of challenges kind of cited for why that were: complexity of processes and the embedded nature of working practices, conflicting business priorities and the scale of change associated with it, transforming those, legacy IT systems that continue to be a challenge for organizations in driving operational efficiency, and also dependencies across the end-to-end market ecosystem. You know, the ability to be able to move and the dependency you have on other participants within the supply chain that makes it hard to drive operational efficiency. For digital adoption, there was a clear view amongst respondents about the importance of Blueprint 2 and the digital processing services. All the respondents were planning to adopt these, but what there was a great deal of variance in the completeness of their plans for doing that, and also the scale of their ambition for how quickly they wanted to move and how fast and how far. It's also noteworthy there's a strong recognition that really the central initiatives are merely seen as table stakes in the digital game, and that true differentiation will come by delivering and layering on their own digital transformation on top of that. They also noted a number of challenges to adoption around lack of confidence in the plans and a lack of clarity around the steps they needed to take, although they did note, and we've also seen significant progress in this area in the recent months. Also, there's a recognition of the interdependency across the value chain again. Real value will only come when a critical mass of participants have adopted digital services. And then finally, data analytics continues to be a key focus. If anything, with the increased appetite for AI and ML, the importance of high quality, timely data is even more important. Progress has been made since the last survey, but not as much as the respondents had expected. And they cited a number of key challenges. They're still grappling with data quality and governance. It's been more challenging than expected to lock down the real use cases that will drive value for them around data analytics. There's so much that can be done in this space, but what should be done and how to prioritize those. And without that clarity on the use cases, a lot of capabilities and underpinning architecture have been built, but on a kind of build it and they'll come basis. And in some cases, this has resulted in false starts and wrong turns. Finally, getting the appropriate skill sets and multifunctional teams together to drive this has been a real challenge. People with deep data skills blended with real market understanding remain elusive in the marketplace. On a positive side, they did cite that emerging market standards like CDR are really helpful in bringing structure to the thinking around data analytics, and in particular in driving standardization across the value chain from a data quality perspective. So I talked before about interdependencies and interplay and the nuance there. This is where the real nuance was. That there's a huge interplay between them. Digital adoption will support operational efficiency, and the latter will also streamline the adoption of the former. High quality data is also at the core of digital, and real operational efficiency will be driven by putting rich data-driven insights in the hands of decision makers. Therefore, organizations will be best served by pursuing all three in a coordinated, structured way, with a particular focus on a few areas. So, process streamlining and standardization, driving data quality and access to rich data insights, and bringing all those conflicting priorities into a coherent roadmap for change, which delivers continuously, but also incrementally. And then, because of the scale of the change, uplifting business change capabilities to be able to absorb the scale of change coming through those transformations. Next slide, please. We'll now look a bit more around Blueprint 2 and adoption and what it means to digitize in the London insurance market. Next slide. Blueprint 2 and digital process service will bring a number of offerings and alignments across the value chain. The placing platforms will drive a digital front door with each iteration will increase the amount of structured data coming in at the front end. And the data standards and things like CDR will bring coherence across the value chain. And the digital gateway will underpin much of this, with finally the other digital services and the digital claims and premium platforms also replacing the legacy systems of digital ones. But as I said before, this is just table stakes in the digital game. And also different placements will be moving at different pace. So that even those who fully embrace all the digital services and the standards at the earliest opportunity won't be fully differentiated. So who will be? And Andy will now pick up the story on Credera's view on that.
Thanks, Nick. We'll go to the next slide, please. So I think, as Nick says, digitisation of the market doesn't in itself deliver competitive advantage to participants. The real trick here is how individual participants will digitise their own businesses. But what does it mean to digitise your business, and what in the future would a leading digital insurer look like? And what we see, and I think this is underpinned by the survey as well, we see 5 key characteristics or 5 themes coming through quite strongly. So firstly, and this is probably fairly obvious, is that we think the leading digital insurers of the future will clearly attract and retain best talent or top talent. There was an interesting McKinsey survey, I think it's a few years old now, which identified or tried to quantify the impact of top talent on organisational performance. And they reckoned it was an 800 times multiplier. But from our point of view, it's not just about attracting and retaining top talent. It's also about focusing that talent in terms of the high value activities. We recently worked with a kind of market participant, a group of underwriters. They actually reckoned that only less than 50% of their underwriting capacity was on high value activities, yet they saw underwriters as one of the key differentiators for obvious reasons. So attracting and retaining and focusing that top talent is clearly really important. The second theme, and this came through very strongly in the survey, I think it was actually rated the #1 focus area in the survey, was all around process efficiency and straight through processing. And we see this all the time. It's one of the key challenging areas that in a lot of organisations, you know, the processes are quite poorly defined. They're often in people's heads. They're often inconsistent, particularly across different lines of business, with lots of manual steps and rekeying in that end-to-end process. And if you kind of wrap all of that up, the implications are it creates an operating model which is pretty inefficient, you know, isn't great in terms of broker service, and can also introduce operational risk into that process as well. Now, what we think is really encouraging is that we are starting to see some pretty good progress, actually, or the start of some good progress. We've seen a huge adoption in recent years of underwriting workbenches, where those workbenches effectively start to bring consistency and automation in the core processes, and then ultimately provide a single pane of glass to start to introduce enriched data and analytics to really augment that underwriting process. We're also seeing the emergence of more and more digital trading platforms. And what this is starting to do is allow organisations to distribute certain lines of business which otherwise would have been economically unviable to them. So clearly, leading digital insurance of the future will high levels of process automation, straight through processing. We're starting to see some progress in that space, which is really, really encouraging. Third area, AI and advanced analytics, and no surprises really here that this came through very strongly in the survey. And our view is that, you know, the leading digital insurer of the future will fully embrace AI and advanced analytics across their value chain. And I think there's been a real shift actually over the last few years. Certainly a few years ago, there was a kind of degree of skepticism about the scale of the impact this would have, just really because of the unique characteristics of the specialty risk business in terms of, you know, it tends to be high value, low volume, you know, clearly very people relationship orientated, clearly specific niches of specialism, knowledge and experience, etc. But I think it's fair to say that clearly ChatGPT and AI type similar large language models, but also the much greater accessibility to machine learning platforms, what that's started to do is kind of what we're seeing is organisations are now starting to introduce use cases and operationalise use cases, whether that's at the very simple end of documentation summarisation, or whether it's into triaging of new business. And in some cases, you know, that digital straight through processing for follower business, we're starting to see those use cases be realised. And, you know, we're quite early on that journey and the trend is going to continue. And I think Nick mentioned actually is that the big challenge in all of this space that we see organisations facing, and it's something we get quite involved in, is the actual quality of the data and the accessibility of the data that underpins those models and allows you to really industrialise AI and analytics within the organisation. But fundamentally, this is what the leading insurers of the future will have cracked. The fourth area, modern technical architecture. I mean, we see this as an absolutely fundamental enabler. And I think we've seen a bit of a sea change, actually, where historically the IT estate has gone underinvested over many, many years. And what that started to do is, you know, build a lot of technical debt and really incrementally started to constrain the organisation, particularly in terms of operational efficiency and change agility. And what we're starting to see, and it came through the survey, is organisations more and more starting to finally tackle some of that legacy estate and move on to some of the modern platforms, whether that's cloud-based, whether that's low-code, no-code type platforms. You know, some of the new entrants coming into the market, well, not necessarily new entrants, but, you know, there are a number of organisations that are probably targeting specialty risk, whether it's Guidewire, whether it's, you know, Salesforce, etc. So there's a lot more options around there, and we're seeing a lot of change in this space, and we're seeing a lot of participants start to adopt that technology and drive value. I think the challenge is, it's probably the challenge that's always been there, is that, you know, that transition can appear very significant in terms of cost when compared with other business priorities, etc. And that need to deliver value incrementally is always a challenge. But we're starting to see organisations make that move, and ultimately the leading digital insurers of the future will have transitioned onto those modern estates. Then the final point is business agility. Again, this came through quite strongly in the survey, where I think everyone recognised that the kind of business agility, that ability to respond quickly, that speed of executing change, is a key source of strategic advantage, competitive advantage. And interestingly, most of the participants in the survey said that their ability to execute change was sort of average at best. So, clearly opportunity for improvement. What we are seeing is, a lot of organisations have embraced agile ways of working, although I'm sure some of the agile purists might argue that against that in some way. But we are seeing a lot of adoption of some of the agile practices. We're starting to see many organisations move to kind of product/value stream concepts, which we think are really powerful. We're starting to see organisations adopt more of the modern engineering practices, by which we mean, automated testing, automated release, that can really supercharge kind of change agility. And I'd say in some areas we're starting to see movement in terms of kind of platform rationalisation, all of which is a massive contributor to business agility. So these are the 5 themes, a kind of combination of what we've seen coming through the survey and our own experience. And I think this starts to kind of frame that future present thinking. I think the challenge is that when you stand back and look at this in its entirety, the kind of scale of the transformation here is absolutely huge. And the big challenge for organisations is, how do you navigate the optimal path through all of this? Now, there's clearly lots of different ways of doing this. We move on to the next slide. One of the techniques that we like to use, which we find quite powerful, is the kind of use of maturity-based frameworks. And this is kind of shown across the four of those areas, kind of maturity framework. What this is really helpful is it provides a simple kind of reference point for visualizing where you are as an organization, where you think the market is, and where potentially you could get to. It also provides a really good framework for starting to build hypothesis of where your investment priorities should be, and how you move through those different stages of maturity. I think one of the things that you start to realize when you work with these models is actually, those core areas are quite interconnected. So, for example, we talked about workbenches earlier. If you deploy a workbench in isolation, you will deliver value because you will start to drive process automation and process consistency. But when you start to marry that up with AI and advanced analytics, it's a multiplier effect in terms of the value that gets delivered into the organization. Likewise, when you start to marry up agile ways of working with modern engineering practices and modern architecture, again, you can start to unlock huge potential within the organization. But the whole point really here is that it's what's the framework really for starting to think about the strategy in this space, and what the logical kind of sequencing path through it is to optimize the value kind of delivered back to the organization. So hopefully what we've done is given you a feel for some of the key themes and insights that came through the IUA survey. Hopefully it's given a lot of food for thought, or some food for thought. Really interested in people's feedback, and also any areas which you think are particularly relevant in the market at the moment for deeper dives, in any of these areas that could add value. So that's pretty much what we wanted to talk about. I hope you found the survey that was published in last year useful. And I guess we'll hand back him for any questions people may have.
Bear with me. I can see there aren't any open questions at the moment, although I think that was quite a lot to take in. So, I mean, I have one, and I guess it's a bit of a subjective one, but clearly a lot of the work that I do is helping our members prepare for the blueprint. And certainly that can seem quite all-consuming. Do you see, in your line of work, do you see a lot of companies innovating internally on things that are completely un-blueprint related? Is there ever an occasion when actually a company's digital agenda is in advance of what's being brought to its door?
Yeah, I'll join that first. Yes, we certainly saw that at one of my recent clients. They're driving a lot of standardization and process through a workbench. They're not and trying to enrich their data. I think the lack of consistent data coming in the front end is a limiting factor for them, and you end up with quite a lot of workarounds to try and improve the data quality. And when the two things can be married up, I think there'll be a force multiplier there. You shouldn't think of the two things in isolation. I think the point we were trying to make earlier is the real power will come here by and there's a virtuous circle, by having a very clear view on your own digital agenda, driving that, doing the stuff you can, but also constructing that alongside a roadmap for adopting the digital services in the marketplace, and using something like coming up with a roadmap for doing that, and using something like the maturity framework to drive the prioritization for doing that. And you've got anything to add to that?
Yeah, no, I think Blueprint 2 is happening, but everyone is running their businesses and driving their businesses forward, and which basically translates into a lot of things we've kind of referred to there. I think the challenge and then Blueprint 2 will come along and we'll work out how we adopt that and how we integrate more into the end-to-end kind of value chain. I think so. One of the challenges that organisations face is that there's finite investment capacity, and there's huge draws on that investment for BAU trading, risk and regulatory stuff that has to be done. So actually, the challenge is that the discretionary investment tends to get smaller and smaller because so much of it is driven by BAU and regulatory, which is one of the reasons why I think this whole business agility is really, really important, actually, because if you can unlock that, if you could drive a 200-300% productivity uplift, which I actually don't think is unreasonable when I look at some of the enablers that are around now, the different ways of thinking about how you deliver change and all that kind of stuff, you could increase the size of that strategic investment quite significantly and get ahead of the game. But yeah, that's the environment. No one's standing still. Everyone is locked on to driving their business forward. They'll work out how to integrate Blueprint 2, when it becomes clearer, initially adoption and then integration. And kind of that's the environment that we see at the moment with some of our clients.
So there is a question that's just come up in the Q&A from Hamish, who asks, what do you see as being the biggest obstacles for insurers to improving data quality?
Wow. So data
Just pick one.
It's a great question. The big challenge, I think, is how do you make data more accessible? How do you drive data quality? How do you drive data consistency? How do you make that common language around your data, the common way you view data is a huge challenge. Clearly, one of the things we get involved in something called kind of DCAM assessments around data maturity frameworks. Another maturity framework, there you go. But which is from one of the industry bodies, which is actually really, really useful to understand kind of all the elements of what makes for good data quality. I think what are some of the challenges? Clearly part of ensuring data quality is having the right kind of organizational framework of data definition, data owners, data stewards, and against that framework, people taking that role really seriously, and having the metrics around it on data quality, but actually acting on those metrics and driving through that quality improvement. So I think it's fairly well established around what the capability domains are that you should have, and it's fairly well established in terms of what the technology enablers are to help you do that more effectively. But so much of this comes down to the culture of the organization and that focus and drive to make data quality an absolute priority within the organization. I don't know if you have anything to add about that.
At its core, there's a huge diverse set of systems underlying them, all of which have different data models, complexity. Overlay on that the cultural points that Andy makes of kind of building a culture of ownership but also, you know, people recognizing the value in doing that. I think because of it's a bit of a vicious circle. It's because a lot of the value, it hasn't come through yet. People don't yet recognize the value in investing the time in taking ownership for data and ensuring its quality and being clear. And there's an ambiguity perhaps for a given system about who owns that data, who's responsible for it, who's accountable. And often the person who gets the value out of the good quality data isn't the same person who is responsible for doing it. So I think there's a really important cultural thing to do to try and drive that. And then it's back, this recurring theme here, it's back to that driving incremental value in a kind of an iterative way. Start small, start in one particular area and build out from that, build quality in that area and show some real value out of it. And that becomes a virtuous circle. And then expand out and bring more people in. Trying to crack it all in one big go all at once is just insurmountable. I guess.
I mean, I think that certainly in my time working on market projects, I've seen a move towards better accountability for data on an organizational level. Yeah. Do you think that's true for you too?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, there's definitely move. Not saying people have cracked it completely though.
Oh, still work to do.
Definitely move. Yeah.
They say the first step is recognizing you have a problem. I think a lot of people recognize they have a problem, but and are starting to move beyond that, but I don't think they're there yet.
Well, I mean, one of the things that's quite helpful as well is starting to really think around the use cases for how you use data and and the relative prioritization of those use cases. Kind of going back to Nick's point about don't try and do it all at once and everything all at once, but that can be quite helpful for bringing real focus in terms of where the priorities are. I think it can work quite well. It's amazing actually. A number of times, we look at an organizational data strategy. Quite often, the sort of gap there is sort of it being grounded in what the future use cases are for data, which sounds very obvious, but quite often that sort of thought process is kind of missing around how that would be used to drive strategy.
So accountability and purpose seem to be quite key then. Yes. We have another question in the Q&A from a mysterious stranger who prefers to remain anonymous.
That's
but they've asked. Yeah, it's probably Louise. That's my boss for anybody that doesn't know. But they've asked, how much will complexity of changing business processes hold up digitization?
So that again, sorry, it's complexity of changing business.
Yeah, so I think, and please feel free to add some clarity, whoever it is that raised this question. I'm going to potentially put words into your mouth here. But I think the idea is that it's centrally we're changing quite a lot with the blueprint, not just in the technology layer, but also in the process layer, which means, okay. But yes, so if we are forcing change upon people, then how much do we think that the work that it has to be done in order to accept and work with that change will hold up digitization in its entirety?
So I personally don't think it should. Right? I think you look at the internal of the operating model within an insurance company, right? They're getting that process re-engineering, that automation, that's digitization of those processes for you as a standalone organization. There's nothing getting in the way of doing that. Being cognizant of what comes in and how that will dovetail into the market kind of just changes and everything else. And yes, there will be some changes, but done in the right way, that shouldn't constrain you. You should be able to evolve and adapt your processes to fit that. I do think as well that the stuff that comes in under Blueprint 2, the kind of standardization on data models and everything else, which actually is a real enabler for your own internal digitization. But I don't see it as particularly as a constraint. Nick, you have a view?
There is an extent to which some of this stuff is a little bit like regulatory change, that it has to be adopted. There's not much choice, but this was always going to come at some point in the market. That the reason that arguably why hasn't there been much change in central services over such a long period of time? Well, it's because it's hard to do, and it's hard to do in a way that works for everybody in the market. When we did the JSP, that was our key consideration: is how do you minimize the change? How do you make as easy as possible for everybody in the market the ability to adopt at their own pace, rather than trying to drive one massive central change program across 250, 300 organizations? That's the mother of all big bangs. It's multiple big bangs simultaneously, and it's scary, and it probably doesn't work. And so the digital processing services and the JSPs that underpinned it, the point was to try and make that as low as it could be in terms of impact, and allow people to move as much as possible at their own pace. But the key word is possible. It's not, there's some stuff that everybody just has to do. And as a market, if the market as a whole wants to remain competitive in a global landscape, then I think it's something everyone needs to take up. And then it comes back to Andy's point, is that how do you set your organization up to be as agile and flexible to receive that as possible? And how do you construct your change portfolio such that it's delivering that stuff in concert with the other priorities you've got as an organization? That answers the question.
Excellent. And do you, this is purely from me, this question, but I've just checked and we've got time for me to have my own. Do you think the new digital services that are being built into the centre will enable a more agile system of change into the future for the market?
Yes, but not immediately. It's a gradual process. There's some kind of foundational stuff that needs to be done first to get us to that point. So getting off all of the old legacy platforms, but with a front end that looks like the old legacy data standards and EDIs and all that other stuff. That's an important, that then allows to build the digital processes it serves on top. I mean, if you think back to the history of kind of LM-TOM and things a long time ago, we tried to wrap a bunch of digital processes around the kind of, it's a bit like trying to hitch a caravan to a Ferrari. The Ferrari just doesn't perform anymore. And so we tried to wrap the digital processes around, or modern digital processes around the legacy systems. It doesn't work. This comes at it the other way around. And so get over those enablers, get clear those foundations and get those roadblockers out of the way. And then, yes, I think it will do that.
Excellent. So Hamish has come back with another question, which is regarding your point about cultural change to encourage people to improve data quality. He wanted to know, how do you motivate people when the long-term consequences of that improved data quality, improved efficiency, change within the organisation has the potential to affect the people affecting the change? It has the potential to affect their employability. It's the turkeys for Christmas question,
wow,
I think.
Yeah, wow. Great question. I think this is the debate, isn't it, around how will it impact roles and how will it impact people. I would say I'm personally the school of thought that says it will augment roles. There'll be certain things that will be replaced, but largely will augment roles. And my big thing would be embrace it and get experience with it, because if you're an early adopter, and now's the chance to be an early adopter, right? You'll become indispensable, I think. So in terms of motivation, look, I think there's, there has to be that, I'd be encouraging people to recognise the opportunity here for them personally, because I think the opportunity is huge for people who get in there early, start using this technology, seeing the impact it can have, right? Embracing it, becoming a strong advocate and voice within the organisation, etc. I think it's huge opportunity for people. That'll be my incentive.
I completely agree with that, by the way. I'll build on it a little. I think people sort of see it as a kind of zero-sum game. That if I build this stuff, potentially it puts my employability at risk. I would argue it also grows the size of the pie, and the roles will still be there. They'll just be different roles, and therefore, to Andy's point, get the skills in those roles and play a part in them to use that augmentation that's there to deliver more with it. And and therefore the best thing you can do is embrace it.
So I guess it's not just about the cultural change to encourage better data quality, but also the cultural change on an organizational level around how you communicate with those people and what you do to nurture them into new jobs and your expanding organization.
I agree. And, you know, responsibility has to sit with the organisations to drive that as well. That's not, I mean, it sounds like probably a little bit like Andy and I were saying, well, it's on the people to go and get the skills. I think it's also on the organisations to create the opportunities for people to do that, you know, create the environments. And a lot of this comes back to the other things we talked about around, you know, change agility and building organisations that can respond to change, building those skills up and slightly changing them.
Yeah, I think the other observation I have is that, you know, a lot of this stuff is very, very accessible. Any of us can go on to, you know, Copilot, ChatGPT, stuff like that. But even some of the machine learning platforms now, you know, they're trying to move it out of the realms of it being purely data scientists who use them. I can't remember what the phrase is now, citizen data, whatever it is. But, you know, there are lots of platforms now are making it very easy for you to use kind of some of the machine learning and advanced analytics characteristics. It's all becoming very accessible. The only thing, you know, which is again another reason for really embracing the technology and what it can do for you. There's nothing really stopping you.
Well, I'll let you into our confession now. So my first draft of my script for these slides this morning, I chucked the report into Copilot and got the key insights out of it and each of the sections. And I had to edit it quite substantially, resequence it, but it was really useful. Actually, you know, you write a report, it's got a lot of words in it, but actually what are the things it's telling you? There was also some stuff in there which I know when I wrote it, there was a subtext underneath it, and what was interesting is it spotted the subtext. Yeah. So incredibly powerful and incredibly accessible, as Andy said, you know, just to do that kind of stuff. So
very good.
So we don't have any more questions. We are rapidly approaching the hour. So I don't know, do you have any closing comments or anything you'd like to add before?
Perhaps, but there's one last slide, just pop that up, just as background. Okay, so this slide, and obviously, as Kim said, the pack will be circulated. It's got contact details for Andy and myself on it. If there's any further questions at all, things that occur to you afterwards or anything else, please do feel free to reach out directly to either of us. There's also a link to the report on there and some other insights which we think are relevant, published on our website, so they're there as well, and please feel free to take a look at those. Just also thank you very much for joining us, and also thank you to anyone who participated anyway in the survey. It was really interesting talking to people during the process of it. I think we got some really interesting insights out of it, and it was a real pleasure to do. And again, thanks to the IUA for asking us to work with them on it again.
Thank you very much.
Excellent. Well, I mean, you've rather stolen my thunder because I think you probably covered most of what I would have said. No, that's absolutely fine. I'm happy with the delegation. But yeah, thank you everybody for dialing in. Again, thank you to the IUA members that did take part in the survey. To others, I hope you got to hear a bit about what's driving our membership's digital agenda, what their issues are from the survey summary. Obviously, please feel free to download and read the full survey if you haven't yet. And a last reminder that all of the materials, recordings, slides, contact details, etc., will be circulated as soon as possible after this briefing.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.